So what is it exactly that you do again, James? Some kind of IT support? My sister Catherine's voice carried across our parents' dining room table with the perfect blend of feigned interest and dismissive superiority she'd mastered since childhood. 12 family members paused their Thanksgiving dinner conversations, turning to watch this familiar dynamic play out. My mother looked uncomfortable, my father resigned. "It's called Systems Integration Consulting," I replied evenly, taking a sip of water. "Basically helping companies make their technology work together more efficiently." Catherine's husband, Mark, snickered. "Sounds like a fancy way of saying you fix computers when they break," he said, cutting into his turkey. "Nothing wrong with that, of course. Someone's got to do those jobs." Catherine nodded with exaggerated sympathy. "Exactly. And it's so nice that even without a fancy MBA like Mark, you've found something stable." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward my modest Toyota in the driveway, visible through the dining room window, parked between their new Mercedes SUV and my parents' Lexus. What Catherine didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that I was the majority owner and chairman of Nexus Technologies, a company currently valued at $214 million after our latest funding round. The systems integration consulting I'd described was deliberately vague, obscuring that I'd built a specialized AI-powered platform now used by over 40% of Fortune 500 companies. The Toyota was a choice, not a necessity, as were the modest apartment I mentioned during family gatherings and the budget vacations I occasionally described. I'd been about to change the subject when my phone vibrated. Glancing down, I saw a text from Rebecca Chen, the CEO I'd hired to handle day-to-day operations, while I focused on product development and strategy. "Acquisition offer just came in, 310 million. Need to discuss ASAP." I excused myself from the table as Catherine continued listing Mark's recent achievements to our captive audience. His promotion to senior vice president, their new vacation home in Vale, the private school they'd selected for their children. I stepped onto the back porch, returning Rebecca's message. "Here with family. Can't talk now." Her response came instantly. "I'm at Morton's downtown. Can be there in 30 min if needed. This is big, James." I hesitated, weighing family obligations against business necessity. As I contemplated my response, the patio door opened behind me. My Uncle Dave stepped out, always the peacemaker in family conflicts. "Don't let Kathy get under your skin," he said kindly. "She just likes to show off." I smiled. "It's fine, actually. I may need to step out for a bit. Something's come up with work." Uncle Dave looked concerned. "On Thanksgiving? Computer emergency?" I made a decision in that moment, not from anger at Catherine's belittling, but from simple practicality. "Something like that," I replied. "Actually, would you mind if I brought a colleague back for dessert? She's in town for business and doesn't have family nearby." What happened next would permanently change how my family saw me, and perhaps more importantly, how I saw myself in relation to them. My name is James Harrison, 36 years old, founder and chairman of Nexus Technologies. 8 years ago, I developed an algorithm that revolutionized how enterprise systems communicate with each other, turning what had been a consulting side hustle into a rapidly scaling technology company. We now employ 187 people across offices in Chicago, San Francisco, and London, with clients ranging from global banks to manufacturing conglomerates. I grew up in a middle-class suburb of Chicago, the youngest of 3 children and the only boy. My father was a successful accountant who eventually made partner at his firm. My mother taught high school mathematics before retiring. My oldest sister, Catherine, 7 years my senior, followed a traditional path to success: prestigious university, MBA from Northwestern, marriage to an equally ambitious business executive, perfect house in an exclusive neighborhood. My middle sister, Elizabeth, pursued a more creative route as a journalist, though no less impressive in her achievements. She's currently a senior editor at a major publication in New York, has published 2 books, and regularly appears on television as a political commentator. Then there was me, the quiet kid who preferred disassembling computers to playing sports, who found programming languages more intuitive than social interactions. While academically successful, I never quite fit the achievement template established by my sisters. Where they were confident and outspoken, I was reserved and analytical. Where they excelled in highly visible fields, my talents lay in the abstract world of algorithms and system architecture. After graduating with a computer science degree from the University of Illinois, not the Ivy League education my parents had hoped for, I took a job with a mid-sized IT consulting firm. The position disappointed my father, who had envisioned me pursuing law or medicine, fields he understood and respected. "It's a starting point," he said at the time, clearly expecting I would eventually find a more impressive career path. For 3 years, I worked diligently within the corporate structure, but increasingly found myself developing independent solutions for clients on weekends, creative approaches that my employer was too conservative to implement. I saved aggressively, living well below my means while building both financial resources and industry connections. When I finally left to start my own consulting practice at 28, my family viewed it as a step backward rather than forward. Catherine was particularly vocal about the risks of entrepreneurship and the importance of established credentials in building a career. My parents, while supportive in theory, clearly shared her concerns about my professional judgment. What none of them realized was that I had already secured 3 major clients and was generating more income independently than I ever had as an employee. More importantly, I was developing the core technology that would eventually become Nexus, a proprietary approach to systems integration that would transform the industry. The breakthrough came during a project for a multinational manufacturing client struggling to connect legacy systems with modern cloud applications. The standard solutions were expensive, cumbersome, and only partially effective. Over a single weekend of intensive coding, I developed a prototype algorithm that seamlessly bridged the gap between disparate systems with minimal configuration. The client's CIO was astounded by the results. "We've had 3 major consulting firms try to solve this problem. What you've done in days would have taken them months if they could do it at all. Within 6 months, I had refined this prototype into a scalable product, formed a proper corporation, and secured $1.2 million in seed funding from angel investors who recognized the technology's potential. I hired a small team of developers to help expand the platform's capabilities, while I continued to handle key client relationships. At this point, I made a conscious decision not to publicize my growing success to my family. This wasn't primarily about eventually surprising them, though I admit that idea held some appeal. Rather, it was about avoiding the scrutiny, advice, and judgment that would inevitably follow. I needed space to build something on my terms, without defending my decisions to people who, while well-intentioned, didn't understand the technology or market I was operating in. As Nexus grew, this separation between my professional and family life became more pronounced. When we secured a $5 million Series A investment 2 years in, I told my parents I had gotten a promotion. When we hit $10 million in annual recurring revenue the following year, I mentioned, "Work is going well," during a holiday dinner. When we expanded internationally and I spent weeks traveling between London and San Francisco, I described it as some work trips coming up. 4 years after founding the company, I reached a crossroads. Nexus had grown to the point where my technical expertise was no longer sufficient for day-to-day leadership. We had 83 employees, complex operations across multiple countries, and investors expecting continued exponential growth. I recognized that my strengths lay in product vision and technological innovation, not organizational management. After careful consideration, I recruited Rebecca Chen, a seasoned technology executive with experience scaling multiple successful startups, to serve as CEO. I transitioned to the role of executive chairman, focusing on product strategy and key client relationships, while maintaining majority ownership of the company. Under Rebecca's operational leadership, Nexus accelerated its already impressive growth trajectory. By the time of that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, Nexus Technologies had raised a total of $67 million in venture capital, maintained strong profitability, unusual for a growth-stage tech company, and was considering both acquisition offers and potential IPO paths. My personal net worth on paper exceeded $150 million, though I continued to live modestly, reinvesting most of my available capital into the business and select technology investments. None of this was reflected in how my family perceived me. To them, I remained the little brother who had chosen a safe but unimpressive IT career, not quite living up to the family's standards of success, but at least steadily employed. Catherine especially had settled into a pattern of benevolent condescension about my work and lifestyle choices. I accepted this dynamic, not from insecurity but from practicality. Correcting their misconceptions would have required explaining complex technology concepts they weren't interested in understanding, justifying business decisions they weren't qualified to evaluate, and navigating the inevitable requests for investment advice, job referrals, or financial assistance that would follow once my actual position became clear. So when Catherine mockingly questioned my career at Thanksgiving dinner, it wasn't the first time I'd allowed such misconceptions to pass unchallenged. What made this occasion different was Rebecca's unexpected text about the acquisition offer, a business development significant enough to justify interrupting the carefully maintained separation between my professional and personal worlds. After speaking with Uncle Dave on the porch, I stepped further into the yard to call Rebecca directly. "Talk to me," I said when she answered. "Vanadium Technologies, $310 million, mostly cash, with a 15% equity component in the merged entity. They want an answer within 72 hours. I processed this quickly. Vanadium was a major player in enterprise software, 5 times our size with complementary technology. The offer represented a substantial premium over our last valuation. Their CEO is here in Chicago for the weekend," Rebecca continued. "Wants to meet tonight if possible." "It's Thanksgiving," I noted, glancing back toward the warmly lit windows of my parents' home. "I know. He's catching a flight to Tokyo tomorrow morning. This is our window." I weighed my options. The acquisition would be transformative if structured properly, but disastrous if key terms weren't negotiated correctly. This wasn't something that could be handled remotely or delayed. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, I decided. "And Rebecca, I may bring you back to my parents' place after. There's something I need to address." When I returned to the dining room, dessert was being served. I explained that I needed to step out for a business matter, but would return shortly, possibly with a colleague. Catherine couldn't resist commenting. Emergencies wait for no man," she said with a laugh. "Even on Thanksgiving. Though I'm surprised. They don't have someone more junior for off-hours support." I smiled politely. "We'll see, save me some pumpkin pie." I arrived at Morton's Steakhouse downtown to find Rebecca already deep in conversation with Gregory Palmer, Vanadium's CEO. As I approached their table, Rebecca stood to greet me. "James, thank you for coming." Greg and I were just discussing initial terms. The next 2 hours involved intense but productive negotiation. Gregory outlined Vanadium's vision for integrating our technology into their ecosystem, while maintaining our brand and team intact. The financial terms were generous, but several governance issues needed resolution. By the end of the meeting, we had agreed on a framework that would require board approval, but addressed my primary concerns about product direction and team protection. "I'll have legal draft the preliminary agreement tomorrow," Gregory said as we concluded. "We can circulate to your board by Monday morning." As we stood to leave, Rebecca glanced at her watch. "It's only 8:30. Still time for dessert with your family if you'd like me to join." I considered the opportunity before me. The conversation with Gregory had crystallized something I'd been contemplating for months. The next phase of Nexus would require me to be more publicly visible as its founder and technological visionary. Maintaining the separation between my professional achievements and personal identity no longer served a practical purpose. "I think it's time," I agreed. "But let me give you some context on the drive over." During the 20-minute journey to my parents' suburban home, I briefed Rebecca on my family dynamics and how little they understood about my actual role at Nexus. She was surprised, but quickly grasped the situation. "So your sister thinks you're some kind of IT support technician, when you're actually her brother, the tech mogul," she said with amusement. That's quite a misunderstanding to maintain for years. It wasn't intentional deception, I explained. More a combination of their lack of interest in the details of my work and my reluctance to correct increasingly inaccurate assumptions. And tonight you want to clarify things? Not dramatically, but yes, it's time for a more accurate understanding. When we arrived, the family had moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. Conversations paused as I entered with Rebecca, making introductions around the room. This is Rebecca Chen, my colleague I mentioned earlier. My mother, ever the gracious host, immediately made Rebecca feel welcome, while my father asked polite questions about whether she was from Chicago originally. Catherine, predictably, took control of the conversation after initial pleasantries. "So, Rebecca, you work with James in IT support?" she asked, that same tone of benevolent superiority, coloring her voice. Rebecca glanced at me with a slightly raised eyebrow before responding. "Actually, I'm the CEO of Nexus Technologies." A moment of confusion crossed Catherine's face. "Oh, the company James works for? How nice that the CEO would come to a colleague's family gathering." "Nexus is James's company," Rebecca clarified. "He founded it and serves as executive chairman. I report to him and the board." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. My father was the first to speak. "James is your boss?" he asked Rebecca directly, clearly seeking confirmation. "Yes. James recruited me from Oracle 3 years ago to help scale the company while he focuses on product strategy and innovation. His technical vision is what built Nexus into what it is today." Catherine's husband, Mark, leaned forward. "And what exactly is Nexus? Some kind of IT consultancy?" "We're an enterprise software company specializing in AI-driven systems integration," I explained, finally offering the accurate description I'd simplified earlier. "Our platform allows disparate corporate systems to communicate seamlessly, reducing integration costs by approximately 70% compared to traditional methods. We currently serve 127 Fortune 500 clients across 19 countries." "That sounds substantial," my mother said carefully. "How many people work there?" 187 employees globally," Rebecca answered. "Offices in Chicago, San Francisco, and London, with plans to expand to Singapore next quarter." My father, the accountant, was processing the implications. "And the company's valuation? If you don't mind my asking." I met his gaze directly. "Our last funding round placed it at $214 million. We just received an acquisition offer of $310 million this evening, which is why Rebecca and I needed to meet during dinner." The shocked silence that followed was broken by Uncle Dave's low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned." Catherine's expression was a complex mixture of disbelief, confusion, and the dawning realization that she had been consistently condescending to someone significantly more successful than herself. Her husband looked equally stunned, mental calculations visibly playing across his face as he compared his corporate vice presidency to founding a 9-figure company. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" my mother finally asked, her voice a mixture of pride and hurt. "It evolved gradually," I explained. "At first there wasn't much to tell, just another startup with potential. By the time it became significant, correcting everyone's assumptions seemed awkward. And honestly, I appreciated having space where I wasn't defined by the company's success." Elizabeth, my journalist sister, who had remained thoughtfully quiet, nodded with understanding. "That makes sense. The separation probably helped you maintain perspective." Rebecca, sensing the family needed time to process, gracefully changed the subject to ask about family photos visible on the mantelpiece. The conversation gradually resumed, though with a noticeably different dynamic. Catherine remained uncharacteristically quiet, while my parents asked increasingly detailed questions about the business as their initial shock faded. Later that evening, as Rebecca and I prepared to leave, Catherine approached me in the entryway. "James, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice lacking its usual confident edge. "I've been patronizing and dismissive about your career for years. It was wrong of me, regardless of what you did for a living. But knowing what I know now," she shook her head slightly, "I feel like a complete fool." "You weren't working with complete information," I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting her apology directly. "That's generous of you," she said, "but it doesn't excuse my behavior. Success shouldn't determine how we treat people, especially family." She hesitated. "I think I've had some reflecting to do for a while now." This moment of genuine self-awareness from Catherine was perhaps more surprising than any reaction to my revelation. As Rebecca and I drove away, she commented on it. "That seemed like a significant admission from your sister." "It was," I agreed. "Catherine has always defined herself through conventional markers of success. Tonight challenged her framework in ways I didn't anticipate." "And how do you feel about finally revealing the truth?" I considered this carefully. Relieved, mostly. Maintaining the separation was becoming increasingly impractical, but also cautious about what changes now. In the weeks that followed, several shifts occurred in my family dynamics. My parents, initially hurt by what they perceived as deliberate concealment, gradually came to understand my reasons for keeping my professional success separate. My father, especially, developed a new respect for my business acumen, occasionally calling to discuss aspects of the company he could appreciate from his financial background. Elizabeth, true to her journalistic nature, bombarded me with insightful questions about the technology industry, genuinely interested in understanding my world, rather than fitting it into predetermined categories of achievement. Catherine's transformation was most notable. Her initial shock gave way to honest self-examination about how she measured worth, both her own and others. Our relationship became more authentic, less defined by the big sister-little brother dynamic that had persisted well into adulthood. The Phanetium acquisition proceeded after extensive negotiation, ultimately closing at $327 million, with improved terms for employee retention and product autonomy. I maintained a significant role in the combined entity, while gaining both liquidity and resources to accelerate our technology vision. Looking back on that Thanksgiving revelation, I recognize it marked an important transition, not just in how my family perceived me, but in how I defined myself in relation to my work. For years, I had compartmentalized my identity, keeping my professional achievements separate from my personal relationships. That separation had served its purpose during the company's growth phase, allowing me to focus on building something substantial without navigating family dynamics simultaneously. But maintaining separate identities had also prevented authentic connections. By integrating these aspects of myself, allowing my family to see my professional reality, while bringing more of my personal self into my business leadership, I found a more sustainable balance. My sister mocked my job, unaware. I owned a $200 million company, and when my CEO stood up to correct her misconceptions, everyone was shocked. But the real transformation wasn't in their perception of me. It was in my willingness to finally integrate the different elements of my life into a more authentic whole. Success, I realized, isn't measured by valuation figures or titles, but by the ability to be genuinely yourself across all contexts, a lesson that ultimately benefited both my personal relationships and my leadership approach in ways I hadn't anticipated. The Toyota, by the way, I still drive. Some habits of practicality remain valuable regardless of net worth, but now it's a choice made with full awareness rather than part of a maintained misconception. One of many small authentications that have made life simpler and more integrated since that revealing Thanksgiving dinner.